Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Snoozy Scientist. Wherever you're tuning in from tonight, maybe wrapped in a blanket, slowly drifting on the couch, or lying under the calm of the night sky, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we're going back, way back, to a time when humans were not the hunters, but the hunted. At the time that the first of our kind stepped onto the Stone Age savannas, we were the most helpless creatures alive. No claws, no sharp teeth, slower than a zebra, weaker than a chimpanzee, and surrounded on every side by predators far stronger than the ones alive today. By every law of nature, we should not have survived, and yet, somehow, against impossible odds, we did. But how? How did fragile humans beat the odds in a world designed to kill us? Was our survival luck or genius? The fossil record tells the story with brutal clarity. Human bones scarred with bite marks, skulls shattered, ribs crushed by predator jaws. Proof that for most of our history, we weren't kings of the earth. We were prey. We were not born rulers of this world. We were the hunted. Every sunrise was a borrowed gift. Every night, a test of whether we would live to see the morning. Tonight, we'll step back into the Stone Age to walk barefoot beside our ancestors as they faced monsters in the dark. We'll see the predators that stalked them, the weapons they created, the shelters they fought for, and the choices that kept us alive when extinction was only one mistake away. Now, this story might be just curious enough to keep you awake a little longer than planned. If that happens, I apologize in advance for the inconvenience of accidentally teaching you something while you try to drift off. I'll do my best to strike a balance between fascinating and gently snoozy, but no promises, because this isn't just the story of predators and prey, it's the story of us, a story of fathers standing up to beasts, of mothers shielding their children, of firelight flickering against cave walls, and of survival hanging by a thread. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is there. Is it late at night, early in the morning, or somewhere beautifully in between? Feel free to share it in the comments. It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. And if you enjoy slowly falling asleep to stories about ancient mysteries, survival and science told with a calm, soothing voice, with no pressure to stay awake, then a like and a subscribe would mean the world to me. It helps keep this little corner of the internet alive and tells the algorithm that sleep and science actually do go together beautifully. Now take a deep breath, let it go, and together let's quietly step back in time to a world where survival was never promised and see just how close we came to never telling this story at all. When our ancestors first looked out over the Stone Age savanna, what they saw was not a world built for them. It was a world already ruled, and every ruler had claws, fangs, and strength beyond anything a fragile human body could match. The grasslands stretched wide and golden under the sun, but every blade of grass could hide danger. Every tree line was a stage where predators waited, and every watering hole was a theater of fear. The lions of that time were not the lions we know today. Modern lions are fearsome enough, but their ancient cousins were bigger, heavier, and more powerful. Imagine a cat large enough to take down a bison with ease, with muscles built for ambush and jaws strong enough to snap bone. These lions moved in prides across the grasslands, and when humans entered their territory, we were not hunters in their eyes, only prey that wandered too close. The sound of paws in the tall grass, the low growl that froze the blood of our ancestors, these were constant reminders that the savanna was not theirs to walk freely, and lions were only the beginning. Sharing the same land were dire wolves, animals larger and more formidable than the wolves we know now. A modern wolf is dangerous when it hunts in a pack, but a dire wolf was heavier, with jaws capable of breaking through the thick bones of giant prey. Packs of them roamed the open plains, working together with a precision that left almost no chance of escape. For a small band of humans, hearing the distant howl of a dire wolf pack in the night must have been a sound of certain death if fire or shelter was not nearby. Then there were the saber-toothed cats, perhaps the most terrifying predators of all. Their massive fangs curved downward like ivory daggers, designed to pierce deep into flesh. They were ambush hunters, striking from cover with explosive force, and once they attacked, escape was nearly impossible. Fossils show that saber-toothed cats were capable of bringing down creatures far larger than humans. To our ancestors, meeting one in the wild was not a battle to be won, it was the end of the story, before it had time to begin. Everywhere the early humans walked, the world reminded them of their weakness. They were surrounded by predators that were not only stronger, but also faster, with senses far sharper than ours. A lion could smell them before they even knew it was near. A wolf could track them across long distances without tiring. A saber-toothed cat could hide in the tall grass, invisible until the final moment. On the savannah, the balance was not in our favor. We were smaller, slower, and vulnerable, and to the animals around us, we were little more than another snack in a land filled with mouths to feed. But what made this world even more dangerous was the scale of these creatures. Many of them were built for a harsher earth, one filled with enormous prey animals like mammoths, giant bison, and ground sloths that weighed several tons. Predators that could bring down such giants had no difficulty overpowering a human body. To the beasts of the savannah, a human was not a challenge. We were easier, softer, and less dangerous than the prey they were built to kill. The landscape itself offered no kindness. The wide grasslands left little cover for a person trying to escape a chase. Open plains that might look beautiful under the sun became deadly stages once a predator noticed movement. At watering holes where humans came to drink, crocodiles larger than any alive today lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for something careless enough to approach. The rivers and lakes that gave life also demanded lives in return. In this world, every choice carried risk. Venturing out for food meant exposure to predators. Fetching water could end in death. Sleeping too far from fire left families open to attack. Even gathering wood or fruit could lead to a sudden encounter with something waiting silently in the grass. Imagine mothers clutching their children as shadows passed in the night, or fathers listening in terror to the growl of a predator moving just outside the circle of firelight. Survival was not a guarantee. It was a gamble played every single day, and yet somehow humans walked forward into this world of monsters. They were not the strongest or the fastest. They had no claws to fight back, no fangs to protect them, and no armor to shield them. They were surrounded by animals that should have erased them, and still they endured. It was a fragile existence, filled with fear and uncertainty, but it was also the beginning of something greater, because while the savannah was ruled by predators, it was also the stage where humanity began to find ways to endure among them, and where survival meant facing the night with courage in the face of impossible odds. For early humans, life was not measured in years, it was measured in nights, survived. The evidence of that struggle lies not in stories, but in bones that still whisper what happened long ago. Archaeologists have uncovered human remains from the Stone Age that bear deep punctures and fractures, unmistakable signs of teeth sinking into flesh, skulls cracked open, ribs crushed, thigh bones gnawed, all preserved in the dirt for thousands of years. These marks are not the wounds of hunters, they are the scars left by something far stronger, reminders that humans were not the ones in control. The predators of that world did not simply hunt in the open daylight. Many waited for the sun to set. Hyenas, with jaws powerful enough to snap the thickest bones, prowled silently around camps, Their sense of smell could pick up a trace of food or even the faint scent of sweat on sleeping bodies. They worked together, moving with patience and intelligence, slipping past the edges of firelight. Some would circle wide while others closed in. Fossil evidence from dens shows what happened next. Human bones mixed with the remains of antelope and bison, proof that men, women, and children were dragged into the darkness and consumed like any other prey. Imagine the terror of hearing a rustle in the grass and realizing the sound was not the wind. The fire might have burned low, the embers glowing faintly, while a family huddled close together. Then, in a blur of teeth and snarls, a hyena pulled a person from the edge of the camp before anyone could react. Screams cut into the night, torches were waved wildly, but it was already too late. In those moments, humanity's weakness was laid bare. Without walls, without weapons sharp enough to kill quickly, people had almost no defense. To be human in that time was to live constantly with the knowledge that death could come suddenly. Even the strongest men, those who carried the heaviest spears, could be overpowered in seconds by a pack. Mothers clutched children tighter at night, whispering to keep them quiet, knowing that a single cry might carry into the darkness where predators waited. The old and the sick slowed the group, making everyone more vulnerable. Entire camps sometimes vanished in the night, their remains discovered later in the dens of beasts. It is difficult to imagine now, when humans walk with confidence through cities and even forests. But for most of our history, we were never the ones that caused fear. We were the ones who carried fear inside us every waking hour. When hyenas laughed in the night, it was not a distant sound. It was a warning that something was close. When lions roared, the ground itself seemed to tremble, and every instinct in a human body screamed to hide. Even water offered no safety. Crocodiles struck without warning, dragging people beneath the surface before their companions could even cry out. The balance of power was so tilted that survival itself looked almost impossible. Humans were soft-skinned, with no armor, no thick fur to protect them from bites, no speed to escape a chase, and no strength to overpower what attacked them. They could not see well in the dark, which meant the world after sunset belonged to other creatures. They had no natural weapons, only stones and sticks that often broke before they made any difference. In the great chain of life, humans were at the bottom, a fragile species clinging to existence. Archaeologists describe this period as one of constant predation. Every generation left behind bones with the same story written across them, teeth marks etched into skulls, bones split for marrow, skeletons carried into dens. These were not isolated accidents. They were patterns repeated over and over across the ancient world. The predators of that age did not see humans as special. They saw them only as meat. For early people, even gathering together in groups was not enough to erase the danger. A pack of hyenas or a pride of lions could outnumber them easily. Night raids were sudden and violent, leaving survivors shaken and broken, but forced to keep moving. The savannah was wide and open, but for humans it was a cage lined with predators on every side. And so, life was not about conquering or dominating. It was about enduring one more day, one more night, until the sun rose again. Each dawn was a fragile victory, and each scarred bone that has survived into the present tells us how thin the line truly was between living and vanishing. Among all the predators that haunted the Stone Age, none captured the imagination more than the saber-toothed cat. Scientists call it Smilodon, though the name feels far too gentle for what it really was. This animal was built like a nightmare, with a body of raw muscle and fangs that curved down from its mouth like the ivory blades of a dagger. Each fang could grow longer than a human hand, sharpened by nature for one purpose, to pierce deep into flesh and kill quickly. These cats were not designed to chase endlessly like wolves or hyenas. They were ambush hunters, built for explosive bursts of power. They would crouch low in tall grass, their spotted coats blending with the earth, waiting in perfect stillness. When prey came close enough, they launched forward with such strength that escape was almost impossible. Their jaws opened wide, far wider than modern cats, to sink those curved teeth into the throat or belly of their victims. And the victims were not small. Fossils show that Smilodon often targeted animals far larger than humans, like giant bison and young mammoths. If they could bring down beasts of that size, then to them a human was not a challenge at all. For early people, there was no true defense against such an attacker. A spear tipped with stone might injure a cat, but only if it struck at exactly the right moment. Most of the time, the strike came too fast. By the time a hunter lifted his weapon, the saber-tooth was already upon him. The strength of its forelimbs alone was enough to pin a human to the ground. Imagine the terror of being held down by a creature 3 times your weight, with jaws lowering toward your throat. The fight ended in seconds. Evidence of these encounters lingers in the fossil record. Human bones from some regions show deep punctures that match the spacing of saber-toothed fangs. In caves once shared by people, archaeologists have found remains of both humans and Smilodon, suggesting that sometimes the hunters and the hunted crossed paths in the same shelter. There are even ancient sites where the bones of several individuals show signs of violent death, likely the work of one of these giant cats. These were not isolated accidents. Encounters with saber-toothed cats were woven into the rhythm of life, moments when survival depended on chance as much as courage. To picture what this was like, imagine a small band of humans traveling across the open plain in search of food. They are tired, their fire is low, and their children are restless. In the distance, they see nothing but grass swaying in the wind. Yet unseen, a Smilodon waits, its body pressed flat to the ground, its eyes fixed on the slowest member of the group. The cat moves with silence, each step deliberate, its muscles coiled like a spring. When the moment comes, it explodes forward. A scream tears through the air. The group scatters in panic, but one person is already in its grip. The attack is sudden, violent, and final. In that moment, there is nothing anyone can do. Stories like these may never have been written down, but they must have been spoken around fires, passed from one generation to the next. Children were warned not to wander far, not to stray into the tall grass where danger waited. The fear of the saber-toothed cat became part of human memory, a shadow that followed our ancestors through the dark. Even now, when people look at cave paintings of lions and great cats, they see not only admiration, but fear. Behind those painted eyes lies the echo of a predator that nearly ended us. The saber-toothed cat was not just another animal of the Stone Age. It was a symbol of how fragile human life was, how thin the line between existence and extinction could be. Every encounter with such a beast reminded early humans that they were not rulers of the world, but survivors on borrowed time, moving carefully through a land where monsters waited in silence. If the saber-toothed cat was the terror of ambush, then the hyena was the terror of persistence. These were not the smaller scavengers we picture today, darting in at the edge of a lion's kill. The hyenas of the Stone Age were larger, stronger, and far more dangerous, with jaws that could snap the thickest bones in half and packs that hunted with teamwork as sharp as their teeth. They became the perfect killers of the night. Unlike the silent leap of a smilodon, hyenas worked together. They moved across the plains in coordinated packs, communicating with eerie calls and high-pitched laughter that carried through the darkness. That laughter was not a joke. It was a signal, a code between hunters, telling the others where to move, when to close in, and when to attack. For humans sitting at the edge of a dim fire, hearing that sound in the distance was enough to make the stomach drop. It meant the pack was near, and once they had found you, there was almost no escape. Hyenas were built to outlast their prey. They could chase for long distances, wearing down animals that were faster at the start, and when they attacked, their teeth did more than tear flesh. They crushed through bones to reach the rich marrow inside. That ability gave them an advantage over almost every other predator. Lions and saber-toothed cats might leave behind bones, but hyenas devoured them completely, grinding them into nothing, nothing except for what they carried back to their dens. Archaeologists have found those dens. Inside, buried under layers of earth and time, lie the remains of their victims, bones of mammoths and bison, bones of antelope and horses, and mixed in among them, human bones, skulls marked with tooth punctures, long bones shattered and gnawed down to stubs. In some caves, there are so many human bones that it paints a chilling picture of what must have happened. Families dragged from camps or travelers caught in the wrong place, brought back to the dark tunnels where the pack lived and consumed like any other prey. These dens were not just the graves of animals, they were the graves of people. For our ancestors, the night belonged to the hyenas. Humans could not see well once the sun disappeared, but hyenas thrived in the darkness. Their eyesight was sharper, their sense of smell keener, and their movements confident under the stars. When the fire burned low and the shadows grew long, hyenas approached the edge of camps, watching, waiting, circling. Sometimes they tested the boundaries with quick lunges, scattering those who sat too close to the dark. Other times, they waited until exhaustion dulled human senses, until a watchman blinked too long or drifted into half sleep. Then they struck, fast and coordinated, teeth flashing in the firelight. The fear of hyenas must have been overwhelming. A child's cry in the middle of the night might have carried out into the savannah, drawing the pack closer. The sound of dry grass rustling was enough to freeze entire groups in silence, ears straining, hearts racing, unsure if what they heard was the wind or the approach of predators. Mothers pulled children close, fathers clutched smoldering branches as makeshift weapons, and everyone prayed that the flames would hold, and the flames mattered. Firelight was one of the only things that could keep a pack from charging straight into the heart of a camp. Without it, the darkness belonged entirely to the hunters. Even then, fire was not always enough. Bones in hyena dens tell us that many nights ended in chaos. Fire scattered, camps broken apart, humans dragged screaming into the grass. Once a person was taken, there was no bringing them back. This cycle repeated itself across countless generations. The hyena was not an occasional danger, it was a constant one. The laughter in the night was an ancient warning, carried through thousands of years, etched into the memory of humanity itself. Even today, when people hear the strange, unsettling cry of a hyena, it awakens something deep inside, a buried instinct that remembers. Life in the Stone Age was already fragile, but with the hyena, it became a battle fought every dusk. Because when the last light of day faded, humans no longer ruled their small circle of fire. The night belonged to others, and those others had teeth strong enough to break the bones of giants. If the night belonged to hyenas, then the rivers belonged to something even older, something that had been perfecting the art of killing long before humans ever walked the earth. To our ancestors, water was life. It was where they gathered to drink, to clean, to cool themselves under the hot weather. But hidden beneath those dark surfaces, jaws waited. The crocodiles of the Stone Age were not the same as those that slide silently through rivers today. They were larger, heavier, and far more terrifying. Some grew to twice the size of modern crocodiles, stretching longer than the canoes people would one day carve. With mouths wide enough to swallow a person whole, the water looked calm. It shimmered in the sunlight, drawing humans closer with its promise of relief. But every step toward the riverbank was a gamble. Crocodiles are masters of patience. They can float for hours, for days even, barely moving, eyes just above the water, nostrils hidden in the surface. To someone watching from a distance, the river might appear empty. Yet a single ripple or faint shadow beneath the surface could mean death was only a few feet away. For the early humans who knelt at the edge to fill a skin with water or to cup their hands and drink, there was little warning. The strike came faster than thought. With an explosion of spray and power, a crocodile surged from the water, jaws snapping shut with a force strong enough to crush bone instantly. Once caught, there was no escape. The animal would drag its victim under, spinning in the water with a violent motion that tore flesh from bone. This infamous death roll, perfected over millions of years, left no chance of survival. Imagine the horror of such a moment. A mother kneeling to fill a container, her child by her side, when the water suddenly erupted. A scream, a splash, and then silence as the surface closed over them. The child left on the bank, staring wide-eyed at the ripples, too shocked to move, while the rest of the group rushed forward too late. These attacks were sudden and merciless, and they happened again and again wherever humans were forced to share water with these ancient giants. The bones of prehistoric crocodiles tell the story of their immense size and strength. Some species reached lengths of over 20 feet, with skulls as long as an entire human body. Their teeth were thick, conical, designed not to slice but to grip and never let go. Archaeological discoveries of human remains near riverbanks suggest that many of the missing never wandered into the grasslands at all, but instead disappeared at the water's edge, pulled silently into the depths. And it was not only drinking that put humans at risk. Rivers were also crossed during long journeys across the savannah. Herds of animals waded through, and humans followed. The crossings became hunting grounds for crocodiles, who waited for the panic of splashing feet and seized the opportunity. In the chaos, people were dragged away, leaving nothing behind but drifting scraps in the current. Every crossing was a gamble against monsters that seemed to rise from the water itself. Children must have grown up hearing constant warnings. Stay away from the edge. Do not play near the river. Do not lean too far when filling the jars. The lessons were carved into memory by loss, each tragedy reinforcing the fear of still water. Yet thirst was stronger than fear. No matter how many attacks, people still returned, because without water, there was no life. It was a cruel bargain. Risk death every time you knelt at the edge, or die slowly without it. What made these predators so terrifying was not only their size or their strength, but their silence. A lion announced its presence with a roar. A hyena's laughter echoed through the night. But crocodiles killed without sound. They lived between two worlds, half in water, half on land, invisible until the instant they struck. For early humans, this was the most frightening of all. To be taken without warning, without even a chance to run, was the purest form of helplessness. And so the rivers that gave life also demanded it in return. Each drink of water was a test of luck, a roll of the dice against jaws perfected over ages. And every ripple at the edge of the savannah carried the memory of those who never returned. If the rivers were dangerous and the grasslands deadly, then surely safety could be found in stone, in the dark mouths of caves. But for early humans, even the promise of shelter came with risk. Caves were not empty waiting rooms for families to move into. They were already claimed. Lions curled in their depths, bears retreated into them for rest, hyenas filled them with bones. To step into a cave was not always to find safety, but to walk into the home of something far stronger. Imagine a small group of humans reaching a cave at dusk, carrying their children, hungry and weary from a long day. They approach the entrance, shadows stretching across the stone floor, the air inside cool and inviting. But from the darkness, the echo of a growl rolls outward. The sound is deep, low, unmistakable. Another family already lives there, but this family is covered in fur, with teeth and claws ready to defend the space. The humans freeze, torches trembling in their hands. They cannot stay, yet turning back into the open night feels just as deadly. Archaeological evidence shows that many caves tell stories of such conflicts. Human remains mixed with those of predators, sometimes in layers that suggest violent encounters. Skulls shattered by bites, bones gnawed alongside those of other animals, traces of blood spilled in battles for space. For early people, claiming a shelter was not as simple as walking inside. It often meant fighting for the right to exist, and many lost that gamble. Even when caves were unoccupied, they were never truly safe. Predators prowled near entrances, drawn by the scent of fire or food. A lion could slip in silently, crouching low before springing on those huddled inside. Hyenas, bold and relentless, might test the perimeter again and again, waiting for weakness. Bears, far larger than modern ones, sometimes returned to find humans had taken their resting place, and their response was swift and violent. To seek shelter in the Stone Age was to place yourself in constant negotiation with beasts that had claimed the land long before us. The only tool that tipped the balance was fire. Firelight turned darkness into a barrier, its glow pushing back predators that hesitated to cross the flickering line. Families huddled deep in caves, flames dancing across the walls, while outside lions paced and hyenas circled. Sparks and smoke filled the air, and for the first time, humans could extend the boundaries of their fragile control. Fire was not only warmth, it was ownership. It marked the difference between being chased from shelter and holding it long enough to rest. Still, fire was a fragile guardian. It demanded constant feeding, constant attention. A fire that died in the night left a group exposed, its protection gone in moments. For that reason, some of the earliest divisions of responsibility may have been born in caves. One person kept watch, another fed the flames, while the rest slept. The sound of crackling wood was the sound of safety, and the absence of it was the sound of terror. The battles for caves shaped more than survival, they shaped imagination. Flames flickering against stone walls created shadows that danced like spirits, and in those shapes, humans saw stories. The shelters that were once filled with growls and blood, later filled with paintings and memory. But before the art came, there was fear, because every cave was first a battlefield. Picture a mother clutching her children in the back of a cave, while men stood guard at the entrance, spears gripped tightly, firelight glinting off sharp stone tips. Outside, the roar of lions echoed, or the scraping of claws on rock announced the presence of a bear. The struggle was not only to survive the night, but to defend a patch of stone where humans could rest. In this world, survival was never granted freely. Every river crossing carried a risk of death, and every step into a cave could be a step into the jaws of another master. Even the walls that seemed solid, that promised protection, could crumble into chaos with one growl in the dark. For countless generations, humans were weak in the dark. Nightfall meant blindness, trembling, and the sounds of predators circling unseen. But then came a spark, a flicker, something that changed everything. Fire was not discovered in one single moment, but in many. Perhaps it was lightning striking a dry tree, or flames spreading after a storm, or embers left smoldering from a volcanic eruption. Whatever its first source, at some point our ancestors learned to hold it, to feed it, to keep it alive, and with that, for the first time, humans held a weapon more powerful than claws or teeth. Predators feared fire. The glow alone was enough to stop many from charging forward. The heat, the smoke, the crackle of burning wood created a barrier that even the bravest hunters hesitated to cross. For early humans, this must have felt like magic, where once they huddled in caves and trees, praying to survive the night, now they sat behind a ring of light, watching lions pace just beyond the flames. Hyenas circled, their eyes glowing in the dark, but they did not cross. The boundary of fire became the first wall that separated humans from the jaws waiting outside. The emotional weight of this change is hard to imagine. Families who once clung to one another in silence could now gather close, their faces lit in orange and gold, their voices carrying softly through the night. The flames warmed their bodies, but even more, they warmed their courage. The shadows on the cave walls danced like spirits, and in those shadows children saw safety for the first time. Mothers could breathe easier, fathers could rest with spears at their sides rather than clutched in trembling hands. The terror of night was not gone, but it was held back by fire's glow. And fire did more than keep predators away. It gave humans a rhythm. The night was no longer just for hiding, it became a time for gathering, for talking, for passing stories from one mouth to another. Around the fire, memories of the day's hunts were spoken, warnings were shared, and lessons were taught. Fire became a school, a gathering place, and a shield all at once. It was the heart of every small group, and to let it die was to invite death back into the circle. The practical uses of fire also reshaped survival. Meat roasted over flames became safer to eat, easier to digest, and richer in calories, giving strength for the constant battles of life. Flames hardened the tips of wooden spears, turning them into sharper weapons. Smoke drove insects away, making nights more bearable. Embers carried from place to place ensured that fire did not have to be rediscovered, only preserved. For early humans, fire was no longer something borrowed from nature, it was something mastered, something claimed as their own. But even this power came with responsibility. Fires had to be fed constantly, and a moment of carelessness could mean disaster. A flame that died in the middle of the night left a group vulnerable, and predators seemed to know when the circle of protection was broken. Someone always had to watch, to guard the sparks, to stir the embers back to life before they faded. It was perhaps the first human duty, the first shared responsibility of survival. The one who kept the fire alive kept the entire group alive. The shift was profound. For the first time, humans were not entirely helpless. They had created something that tilted the balance, something that made even the fiercest lion hesitate. They could now imagine nights without terror and futures that stretched further than the next sunrise. Fire was not just warmth, it was hope, flickering and alive, carried forward from one generation to the next. And yet, beyond the circle of light, the darkness was still filled with teeth and eyes. Lions still prowled, hyenas still laughed, bears still roamed. Fire gave humans a weapon, but it did not erase the danger. It only gave them the strength to face it. And as the flames burned on, new challenges arose with every setting sun, testing whether the fragile spark of survival would continue or fade back into the dark. Even with fire flickering at the heart of a camp, the night remained a place of dread. For humans, darkness was an enemy that stripped away the little advantage they had gained. Eyes that could follow the curve of the horizon in daylight became nearly useless when the sun sank, Shapes blurred into shadows, and shadows into nothing at all. Beyond the circle of firelight, the world was invisible, yet full of watching eyes. Predators owned the night. Lions, hyenas, leopards, and countless others moved easily under the stars, their sight sharp, their senses alert. To them, the cover of darkness was a cloak that allowed them to slip silently through the grass, their movements guided by instinct older than time. Every rustle, every faint breath of wind, every snapping twig might be a signal that danger was near. For humans, the problem was not knowing which sounds were harmless and which meant death. Picture a family huddled close beside the fire, their faces glowing orange, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Beyond the circle of light, the night hums with insects, but then a sound breaks the rhythm. A low growl rolls across the grass, so deep it seems to shake the ground itself. Children stiffen, eyes wide, their small hands reaching desperately for their parents. Mothers whisper for silence, their arms trembling as they draw their little ones against their chests. Fathers grip crude spears, knuckles white, staring into the dark but seeing nothing. Every heartbeat feels louder than the crackle of the flames. The terror of the night was not only in the predators that attacked, but in the endless waiting. Hours stretched painfully long, broken by sudden noises that froze entire camps in fear. The brush of fur against tall grass, the snapping of a branch, the soft pad of paws moving just outside the firelight. Sometimes these were false alarms, but sometimes they were not, and when they were real, the attack came with a violence that seemed to split the world in two. The emotional toll of these nights ran deep. Children grew up in constant fear of the dark, their earliest memories shaped not by play, but by the sounds of predators circling their homes. Mothers carried the burden of protecting their young with nothing but their arms and whispered prayers. Fathers, no matter how brave, faced the crushing knowledge that even their strongest efforts might not be enough. The night was a test that few could endure without scars, not the kind carved into the skin, but the kind etched into memory. And still, the darkness came every evening. The setting sun was a warning that survival now depended not only on strength, but on endurance. To sleep too deeply was dangerous, to let the fire fade was deadly, and to wander even a few steps beyond its glow was almost certain death. The predators were patient, and humans had to be more patient still. Survival meant outlasting the night, 1 hour at a time, until the first pale light of dawn spread across the sky. The terror of the night was not simply fear, it was the foundation of human instinct. The racing heart at a noise in the dark, the jump at shadows, the unease of walking alone after sunset. These feelings trace back to the time when one mistake in the darkness meant the end. Night shaped behavior, it shaped families, and it shaped the stories that were told around the fire to warn children of what lurked just beyond the glow. And as the fire burned and eyes strained into the black, humans slowly began to learn that the only way to survive was not to face the darkness alone. Together, they stood guard, together they fed the flames, and together they endured until morning. Yet the fear never left. The night was not simply a time of rest. It was a battlefield where silence, shadows, and unseen hunters tested the fragile line between life and death. In the long nights when humans huddled close to their fires, there were always eyes shining in the dark. Not only lions and hyenas watched from the grass, but wolves too. These were not the loyal companions we know today, not the animals that sleep at our feet or greet us with wagging tails. The wolves of the Stone Age were fierce, hungry, and relentless. They followed human groups like shadows, moving silently at the edge of sight, waiting for a weakness. At first, Wolves were another predator to fear. They hunted in packs, using strategy and cooperation to overwhelm animals much larger than themselves. To a small group of humans, a pack of wolves was as deadly as a pride of lions. The howls that rolled across the night sky were not calls of comfort, they were warnings of hunters on the move. People could do little but tighten their circle around the fire, clutching children, listening to the chorus echoing through the dark, knowing the wolves were near. But something strange happened over time. As wolves trailed human groups, drawn by the smell of cooking meat or the scraps left behind after a hunt, they began to linger longer. Hungry wolves sometimes stole bones, tossed aside, or scraps that humans did not bother to keep. Perhaps at first they came closer in secret, darting forward to snatch food when no one was watching, retreating again into the shadows. But little by little, the distance between wolves and humans shrank. For humans, too, there must have been a realization. Wolves, with their sharp senses and powerful bodies, were dangerous, but they were also useful. Their hearing was far sharper than ours. Their noses could track scents across great distances, and their howls could alert an entire camp to danger long before a predator reached the edge of the firelight. At some point, the relationship shifted. Not all wolves remained enemies. A few became something more. Perhaps it began with the bravest wolves, the ones bold enough to linger near humans without attacking. Maybe they were younger, hungrier, or outcasts from their packs. Humans may have noticed that these wolves did not strike, but waited, hopeful, cautious. Food offered at the edge of the fire might have been accepted one night, and then again the next. Slowly, trust began to form, fragile as sparks in the dark. Over generations, this trust deepened. Wolves that stayed close to humans learned that scraps were easier than hunting, and humans learned that wolves were not just mouths to feed, but eyes and ears that could guard the night. Some wolves warned of danger with growls and barks, chasing away threats before they reached the camp. Others followed hunters during the day, tracking the scent of prey through forests and grasslands. Step by step, the bond grew. The first dogs were not born in a single moment. They emerged gradually, shaped by time and companionship. Wolves that were gentler, more tolerant of humans, survived and passed on their traits. Humans, in turn, welcomed those animals, protecting them and raising their young. What began as a cautious exchange of food for safety became something greater, a partnership. The presence of dogs changed the nights. Where once humans listened in terror to the sounds of predators approaching, now they had guardians that heard the danger first. A dog's bark could rouse an entire camp before a lion even reached the edge of the fire. Their loyalty meant they did not only warn, they stood their ground, teeth bared, ready to defend the group that had become their pack. For children, the growl of a dog at their side was a comfort in the dark, a signal that someone else was watching while they slept. During the hunt, dogs gave humans a new advantage. They could track game through tall grass, flush animals from hiding, and even help surround prey. For the first time, humans were not alone against the wilderness. They had partners with sharp noses, keen eyes, and fierce loyalty. Together, they could do what neither could achieve alone. What began as fear slowly transformed into one of the greatest alliances in history. Wolves that once stalked humans became protectors, companions, and hunters at their side. The line between wild predator and trusted friend blurred, and the world was never the same. Even with fire at their side and dogs beginning to stand guard, humans still lived in a world filled with giants. These were animals so large and so powerful that every encounter could have ended in disaster. Their presence on the landscape was a constant reminder of how fragile human survival really was. Among the most fearsome were the cave bears. Imagine stepping into a dark cavern, hoping to find shelter, only to realize it was home to a creature that stood twice as tall as a man when it reared on its hind legs. Cave bears could weigh more than 1,000 pounds, with claws long enough to rip through flesh and thick fur that made them seem even larger in the shadows. To face one of these beasts in the narrow space of a cave was not just dangerous, it was almost certain death. Humans were not fast enough to escape and not strong enough to fight. All they could do was hope the bear chose not to notice them, or that fire would be enough to hold it back. Then there were the dire wolves. Larger and stronger than the wolves that live today, dire wolves had jaws built for crushing bone. Their bites were powerful enough to snap the thick legs of bison, and when they hunted in packs, their strength multiplied. A single dire wolf was frightening, but a dozen moving together was like a wall of teeth and muscle. They could surround prey, cutting off every escape, and then drag it down in a fury of snapping jaws. For humans caught in their path, the outcome was grim. Spears and fire helped, but against a full pack of dire wolves, survival meant luck more than skill. Their howls must have chilled the blood of anyone who heard them echoing across the plains at night. And the danger was not only on the ground. The skies, too, carried predators that threatened human life. Massive birds of prey soared above, their shadows stretching across the earth. Some of these raptors had wingspans wider than the height of a grown man, with talons sharp enough to pierce bone. To an early human child, wandering even a few steps away from the safety of the group was a risk. There are stories buried in ancient bones and myths of birds swooping down and carrying off the smallest and most vulnerable. Mothers must have watched the skies with fear, pulling their children close whenever a shadow crossed overhead. The land was dangerous, but so too was the air. Living among these giants must have felt like walking through a world built for someone else, a world where every path was lined with creatures more powerful, faster, and better armed for survival. To be small and weak in such a place was to live with constant awareness that one mistake could mean the end. Yet humans did not simply vanish. They learned to study these animals, to recognize their patterns, to avoid them when possible, and to use their intelligence as the only weapon that could compete with size and strength. Even so, the presence of such giants shaped human fear in ways that still echo today. The stories told by firelight were not only about lions or hyenas, but about bears that blocked the cave entrance, wolves that moved like armies, and birds that struck from the clouds. Children grew up with these images burned into their imaginations, reminders of the dangers waiting just beyond the safety of the camp. Fear was not only an emotion, it was a survival tool, passed down from one generation to the next, warning every child to stay close, to stay alert, to stay alive. And still, the world was filled with more than giants of claw and tooth. Beyond them, humans also faced challenges from the very earth itself, from storms, from shifting landscapes, and from forces far larger than any predator. Each new trial tested whether the fragile thread of survival would hold or snap under the weight of a hostile world. In a world filled with cave bears that could block a cave entrance, dire wolves that hunted in packs, and birds large enough to sweep children away, a single human stood no chance. Alone, stripped of the fire and the tools of a group, a human was the weakest animal on the landscape, without claws, without speed, without the ability to overpower. Survival alone was almost impossible. But humans did not remain alone for long. They found strength in one another, and that strength changed everything. Imagine a single hunter stepping into the grasslands. His footsteps are light, his spear clutched tightly, but his eyes are filled with fear. Every sound around him feels like a threat, every shadow a predator waiting to strike. He knows that if something charges, he cannot stand his ground. His best hope is to run, but he is slower than most creatures that hunt him. Alone, his story would almost always end the same way, in silence. But when he walks beside others, something changes. When humans gathered in groups, they became more than fragile bodies. They became a unit, a living wall of eyes, voices, and hands. One person could hear a branch snap, another could spot movement in the grass, another could raise a spear, while others prepared to defend. A lone predator might attack a single human without hesitation, but when faced with 10 or 12 together, its courage faltered. The odds were no longer in its favor. The power of numbers was not only in defense. In groups, humans could surround animals larger than themselves. They could drive herds of bison or antelope toward traps, shouting and waving fire until the prey stumbled into pits or over cliffs. Spears thrown from many hands at once could bring down animals that none could face alone. And when danger came suddenly in the night, voices shouting together, stones thrown together, and fires fed together created a storm that even the boldest predator hesitated to enter. This strength in numbers also gave humans the gift of roles. Not everyone needed to do the same thing. Some could keep the fire alive, while others stood guard. Some could watch the children, while others set out to hunt. Some could track prey, while others waited to strike. Division of effort made survival more efficient, and it gave early humans time to think, to plan, to teach, to grow. Perhaps the most powerful gift of the group was communication. Alone, a human could see danger, but could not spread that knowledge further than a cry of panic. In a group, signals, gestures, and later words carried warnings quickly. A single child's scream could alert the entire camp, and in moments, the whole group was ready. This ability to share fear, to turn one person's senses into protection for many, became a force greater than claws or fangs. It was not only safety that grew from numbers, but courage. A person who trembled alone found strength when standing shoulder to shoulder with others. The fear of the night was easier to endure when you could hear your companions breathing beside you, when you knew that if something attacked, you would not face it alone. This sense of belonging became a shield as important as fire, and in this way, humanity's greatest weapon was born. Not fire, not stone, not the spear, but the group itself. Cooperation became the thread that wove survival together. Each life protected another, each hand lifted another, and together they carved a fragile foothold in a world built to erase them. The savannas still echoed with the roars of lions and the laughter of hyenas, but now those sounds were met with the voices of humans, shouting together, standing together, refusing to be erased. The giants of tooth and claw still walked the land, yet for the first time their dominance was challenged by something new, something they could not crush with muscle alone. Humans had found the one weapon no predator could match, the power of many beating as one. Numbers gave humans courage, but courage alone was not enough. Even in groups, they were not the strongest creatures on the savannah. A pack of hyenas still had sharper teeth, a pride of lions still had more muscle, and a single bear could still scatter an entire camp. To survive, humans had to use something that no predator could match: their minds. They did not win by overpowering, but by outsmarting. One of the earliest strategies was patience. Humans learned to wait at a distance while predators made their kills. A pride of lions might bring down a massive antelope, tearing it apart with fangs and claws, their roars echoing in the night. Hyenas would swarm in, snapping bones, fighting each other for scraps. But once the feeding frenzy ended, Once the predators had eaten their fill and moved on, humans approached. With sharp stones and fire to drive off scavengers, they claimed what was left. To many, it may seem shameful to live on leftovers, but for humans, it was survival. The marrow inside bones, cracked open with heavy rocks, held rich nutrients that others ignored. Flesh left clinging to the skeleton was scraped away and roasted, keeping families alive when fresh hunts failed. This scavenging was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of cleverness. Predators used strength, but humans used timing. By letting others take the risks of the hunt, humans gained food without the danger of facing hooves and horns. They watched, they waited, and then they took. But strategy did not stop there. Humans also learned to turn the landscape into a weapon. They noticed that predators chased prey until exhaustion, but humans could run in a way most animals could not. Unlike lions or wolves that relied on short bursts of speed, humans could keep running steadily for hours. They did not have to be faster in the moment, they only had to last longer. Slowly, over long distances, humans could exhaust even the strongest prey. This strange skill, called persistence hunting, was not about muscle, but about endurance and planning. Predators were powerful in the short game. Humans survived by playing the long one. Outsmarting also meant paying attention to patterns. By watching carefully, humans learned where lions hunted, when hyenas prowled, and where wolves made their dens. They knew which watering holes were safe at certain times of day, and which ones were certain death. Knowledge became as sharp as any spear. Children were taught these lessons early, their small ears listening to warnings spoken around the fire. To step into the wrong place at the wrong time was not a mistake anyone could afford to make twice. Patience, endurance, and knowledge together became tools as vital as fire. A mother might wait with her children until predators left the riverside, then lead them quickly to collect water before danger returned. A group of hunters might follow the tracks of an animal all day, not to ambush it immediately, but to wear it down mile after mile until exhaustion brought it down. In each case, humans survived not because they were stronger, but because they understood when to move, when to wait, and when to strike. Every act of survival was shaped by thought. Even the scavenging of bones required tools, sharp edges carved from stone that turned scraps into meals. Every hunt required planning. Every night demanded watchfulness. Every journey meant weighing risks against rewards. Predators had instincts honed by evolution, but humans had something different: foresight. They could imagine what might happen before it did, and that imagination saved lives. Outsmarting the predators was more than survival. It was the first sign of a shift in the balance. Humans began to see that they did not always have to run, they did not always have to hide. With patience and strategy, they could take food from the jaws of lions, they could track animals that should have been untouchable, and they could endure where others could not. Slowly, the hunted began to learn how to bend the rules of the game, and as they sharpened their minds with each close call, new challenges emerged that tested this fragile intelligence in ways even more dangerous than hunger. The greatest of these trials was not from predators stalking the dark, but from within their own camps, from the smallest and most vulnerable lives they carried with them. For all the cleverness and patience that helped humans outsmart their predators, there was always one truth that could not be avoided. The greatest weakness of every group was also the very reason they fought to survive at all: the children. Children were the heartbeat of a tribe, but they were also its most dangerous burden. They were loud when silence was needed, their laughter or cries carrying across the grasslands, alerting predators that prey was close. They were slow when speed meant life, their tiny legs unable to keep up when danger forced the group to flee. They were fragile when strength was required, with bones that broke easily, skin that could be torn by thorns or claws, and little bodies that could not endure long nights of cold without warmth. Yet no matter the risks, humans did not abandon them. Entire tribes would sacrifice food, safety, and even their own lives to protect the young. A mother would wrap her arms around her child, shielding them from the swipe of a claw. A father would stand between the firelight and a charging predator, spears raised, knowing he might not walk away. Older children carried younger ones on their backs, stumbling through the dark because leaving them behind was never an option. Every child that survived the Stone Age was nothing short of a miracle. Survival for adults was already uncertain, but for the young it was even less likely. Illness struck them harder, hunger drained them faster, cold pierced them deeper. A single night without food or warmth could mean the end for the smallest among them. And still, parents fought to give them another chance, another day, another breath. The danger was not only from predators. A child wandering a few steps from camp could fall into rushing water, be bitten by a snake, or vanish into the tall grass where no one could find them. Entire search parties would risk themselves to bring one child back, knowing that the loss of even one small voice weakened the entire group. For humans, survival was not only about the present, it was about the future, and that future lived in the tiny hands that clung to their mother's fur clothing and the wide eyes that stared into the night. There must have been moments of unbearable fear, when the cries of a baby threatened to draw lions closer, when a toddler's stumble slowed a fleeing group, when hunger gnawed at everyone but food had to be given to the youngest first. Each decision was cruel in its weight. To save the children often meant greater danger for the adults, but the choice was always the same: to carry them forward, to protect them, no matter the cost. And yet, children were more than weakness. They were also the reason tribes pushed through their fear and exhaustion. To hear a child's laugh around the fire was to remember why they endured. To see them take their first steps was proof that life could continue. To watch them grow into hunters and gatherers meant that the fight had not been in vain. Each child who survived carried with them not only the hopes of their parents, but the survival of the entire human story. The presence of children also shaped how humans lived together. Camps had to move slower, shelters had to be built stronger, food had to be shared more carefully. Predators forced humans to be cautious, but children forced them to be compassionate. It was this compassion that tied groups together, making survival not only about individuals, but about families and futures. So while children made humans weaker in the moment, they also made them stronger in the long struggle to endure. For every risk taken to protect a child, for every night spent keeping them warm, for every step slowed to carry them further, humanity wove into itself a bond that no predator could break. And as the cries of children echoed into the night, they became a reminder of why fear itself became so deeply etched into human memory, shaping instincts that would linger in dreams and stories long after the predators had passed. The cries of children in the night carried more than the sound of vulnerability. They carried the echo of fear. For early humans, fear was not just an emotion. It was a survival tool, sharpened by countless close calls with the predators that circled in the dark. It was fear that kept families huddled close to the fire, fear that froze them in silence when they heard a branch snap, fear that turned every rustle in the grass into a possible death sentence. Fear became part of what it meant to be human. It was written into the body, into the heartbeat that quickened at sudden movement, into the shiver that ran down the spine at the sound of a growl. It was a signal that danger was near, even when eyes could not see it and ears could not confirm it. Fear became a radar, invisible yet always scanning, guiding choices that often meant the difference between life and death. Night after night, these instincts were trained by real encounters. When hyenas dragged people away from the edges of camps, the survivors remembered, and their children grew up more cautious. When lions stalked silently through tall grass, those who escaped told their stories, passing down lessons wrapped in dread. Over time, these warnings hardened into myths, shaping the way humans saw the world around them. Every culture carried stories of monsters in the dark, creatures with glowing eyes, sharp teeth, and unstoppable strength. To modern ears, these tales sound like legends, but to early humans, they were memories dressed as stories. A nightmare of a shadow reaching into the cave was not imagination. It was the brain replaying what had once been real, a lion slipping past the firelight or a bear bursting through the entrance. Dreams became practice for survival, rehearsals for dangers that could return at any moment. Even today, the echoes remain. Children who have never seen a lion still fear the dark. People who have never faced a predator still feel unease at the sight of glowing eyes in the night. These instincts are the ghosts of the Stone Age, passed down through bloodlines, shaping reactions long after the predators themselves have vanished. It is why the snap of a twig in the woods sends a jolt through the body, why shadows feel alive, why silence can be more terrifying than sound. This fear did not weaken humanity, it protected it. A child who startled at the call of an owl might live, because that same reflex would save them when it was not a bird, but a hunting cat nearby. A parent who lost sleep listening for danger would still be alive to feed their children in the morning. Fear demanded vigilance, and vigilance gave survival a fighting chance. But fear also changed the way humans thought and created. Around the fire, the oldest would tell stories, their voices low and trembling, reminding the young to never stray too far, to always respect the power of the night. These stories became part of culture, warning dressed as legend, instruction wrapped in fear. The great beasts were remembered not only as animals, but as spirits, demons, and gods. Fear itself became sacred, a teacher that shaped choices and kept the fragile thread of life from breaking. The constant presence of fear reshaped the body as well. The human brain grew ever more alert, tuned to pick out patterns in the dark, to spot danger even when it was only half hidden. The quickness to imagine threats, the same quickness that creates nightmares, gave humans an advantage. Better to imagine a predator that was not there than to ignore one that was. Over generations, this instinct became so strong that even in moments of safety, the heart could race and the body could tremble at shadows. Fear became the quiet companion of humanity, always near, always whispering, always watching. It was not comfort, but it was protection. It guided hands to hold children closer, guided hunters to wait longer, guided tribes to move before danger struck. And while predators ruled the night with tooth and claw, humans ruled it with vigilance and memory, with the invisible strength of fear. And from that foundation, humans began to create not only stories, but tools, sharp edges of stone shaped by trembling hands, weapons that gave them the power to finally strike back. Fear kept early humans alive, but fear alone was not enough. The savannah was too harsh, the predators too many, and the nights too long. To survive, fear had to be turned into action, into something that could reach beyond trembling hearts and pounding chests. That something came in the form of the first tools. With stones, shaped by careful hands, humans began to carve a thin line of defense between themselves and the monsters that circled them. The earliest stone tools were crude, nothing more than sharp flakes struck from larger rocks. Yet in those edges was power. A flake of flint could slice meat from bones left behind by lions. It could cut through hide to make coverings against the cold. It could sharpen sticks into points that carried more danger than bare hands ever could. The making of these tools was not just survival, it was the beginning of control. Imagine the scene: a group of humans gathered around a flat stone, one of them striking it carefully with another rock. A sharp crack echoed, a chip fell away, and suddenly a new edge gleamed in the firelight. Around them, children watched with wide eyes, learning how patience and precision could turn something ordinary into something life-saving. These moments carried weight, for every strike of stone against stone gave them more than a tool. It gave them a chance to fight back. As tools grew sharper, humans discovered they could be turned into weapons. A stick hardened in the fire could pierce the hide of an animal, but with a stone point lashed to its tip, it became far more than wood. It became a spear. This simple invention changed the balance, though only slightly at first. For the first time, humans had a weapon that did not require teeth or claws. They did not always have to throw themselves against an enemy with bare hands. A spear could be thrust from a distance, keeping bodies safer, keeping families alive. The first spears were rough, heavy, and often broke, yet even so, they carried a power no human had ever held before. A group armed with spears could stand in a line, pointing their sharpened tips outward, creating a barrier of wood and stone that even the boldest predator hesitated to cross. No longer were they entirely helpless when a lion charged or a hyena crept too close. They had something to strike with, something to make the predators feel pain in return. It is hard to imagine how revolutionary this must have felt. For countless generations, humans had only fled, hidden, or prayed for survival. But with a spear in hand, they could look a predator in the eye and know that the fight would not be one-sided. A thrust could wound, a throw could drive back, and sometimes, with courage and numbers, a spear could kill. This new power spread quickly. Groups who learned to craft spears passed the skill to their children, who carried it forward as instinct. The process became part of daily life, collecting stone, shaping points, binding them to wood with fibers or sinew. It was slow, difficult work, but it gave hope. With spears, hunts became more possible and defenses stronger. Families could push predators back from the firelight, and hunters could gather meat without always waiting for lions to finish first. Of course, the world did not suddenly become safe. Spears did not make humans invincible. A single mistake still meant death, and predators still outmatched them in strength. But the spear marked the first step toward turning fear into force. With every predator that limped away wounded, with every human that survived an encounter that once would have ended in silence, confidence grew. Fear still guided them, but for the first time, fear had a sharp edge. And with this new edge in their hands, humans began to see possibilities that had never existed before. If stone and wood could be shaped into something deadly, what else could be created to change the balance of power? That question lingered with every spark of firelight and every clash of stone, carrying humanity into the next stage of its battle for survival. Even with fire burning at the heart of a camp and spears clutched tightly in human hands, safety was never certain. The night still belonged to the predators, and the predators were patient. They circled in the darkness, waiting for weakness, listening for the soft cry of a child or the cough of an elder. When they struck, it was sudden, violent, and unforgettable. Archaeologists have found chilling evidence of these moments frozen in time, in caves and open sites alike. Layers of bones tell a story of destruction, human remains mixed with the teeth marks of lions, or the shattered bones left behind by hyenas. Sometimes, the bones of humans are found lying side by side with the remains of predators, as if both species died in the same desperate struggle. Camps were not only shelters, they were battlegrounds. Imagine the scene. A small group huddles around a fire, believing the flames will keep danger away. The night air is heavy, the grass around them rustles. At first, it seems like the wind, but then glowing eyes appear just beyond the firelight. The lions have come. They pace slowly, circling, their bodies low to the ground. A spear is raised, voices whisper in fear, and then chaos explodes. A lion charges, scattering sparks as it leaps through the fire. Screams fill the night as the tribe scrambles in panic. Some fight back with sharpened wood. Others run into the darkness, only to be chased down before dawn. What fire and weapons had given in confidence was often ripped away in those moments. A single predator could cause destruction, but a pack or pride could wipe out an entire camp. For humans, the memory of these attacks was not something that could be forgotten. They became etched into their behavior. Camps were placed carefully, fires were tended constantly, and guards stayed awake while others slept. But even with all that care, attacks still came. One of the most terrifying truths was that predators were not only stronger, but also clever. Hyenas, for example, learned to test the edges of human groups. They prowled near, waiting for one person to wander too far from the fire. Sometimes they dragged people away in silence, the rest of the camp waking only to discover a trail of blood in the morning. Other times they struck in numbers, their bone-crushing jaws snapping spears in half as they overwhelmed terrified families. Evidence from dens shows human bones gnawed alongside those of antelope and deer, proof that to hyenas, people were just another meal. Cave bears brought another kind of terror. A cave that seemed like safe shelter could suddenly turn into a death trap. Some bears stood taller than 3 men, their strength impossible to match. Humans unlucky enough to stumble into an occupied cave often never left it. Their remains still lie in layers of soil, mixed with the massive bones of the beasts that killed them. Even when a camp seemed well defended, even when fire burned brightly and spears were sharpened, the balance was fragile. A gust of wind could weaken the flames. A single moment of panic could break the line of defense. A child's cry could give away the camp's position to predators lurking nearby. Survival was built on vigilance, and vigilance could never rest. The fossils left behind show just how constant this danger was. Sites where human bones are cracked open, in the same way as prey animals tell us that predators saw little difference between species. A human thigh bone shattered to reach the marrow carried the same value as that of a zebra or antelope. To the predators of the Stone Age, humans were not special, not powerful, not untouchable. They were simply meat, warm bodies that could be hunted when hunger grew too sharp. The memory of those nights lived on. It shaped the way humans built their camps, the way they guarded their children, the way they told stories around the fire. Every tale of monsters creeping in the dark, every warning whispered to a restless child, carried echoes of real nights when camps were overrun and families destroyed. And from these constant attacks came the drive to find new solutions, new defenses, and new ways to turn the environment itself into an ally against the killers that surrounded them. The predators of the Stone Age were stronger, faster, and armed with teeth and claws that no human could ever match. But strength alone did not always decide survival. Humans carried something invisible yet powerful, something no predator possessed. They could look at the world around them and see not only danger but opportunity. Where lions saw only open grass, humans saw places to dig. Where hyenas prowled through ravines, humans saw choke points. Where rivers cut the land, humans saw ways to trap rather than be trapped. Slowly, and often desperately, they learned to turn the environment itself into a weapon. It likely began with simple pits dug into the ground, with sharpened stakes at the bottom and leaves spread across the surface to hide them. These pitfalls turned the very earth into a trap. A charging predator could be led into such a hole, its weight carrying it down into sharpened wood. What was once a helpless group could suddenly gain the upper hand, not by fighting the beast with bare hands, but by letting the ground do the killing for them. These pits were also used in hunting, but for those living in constant fear of attack, they were life-saving barriers that transformed the savannah into an ally. Ambushes became another form of protection. A small band of humans, too weak to fight lions in the open, could position themselves among rocks, waiting with spears and stones. The terrain forced predators into narrow paths, where every angle could be used against them. A single large boulder rolled at the right moment could scatter a pack. A line of sharpened branches driven into the earth could slow a charge just long enough for spears to strike. It was never a guarantee of survival, but it was a way to fight back without matching muscle with muscle. Snares, too, played their role. Twisted fibers and hidden loops, set near well-worn predator trails, became silent defenders of the camp. A caught paw or leg did not always kill, but it slowed. It bought precious moments, and in a world where seconds meant the difference between life and death, that was enough. Every trap set was a signal that humans were no longer content to remain prey. They were beginning to shape the battlefield. Picture a camp under attack. Instead of scattering into the dark, the group retreats toward ground they had prepared. A lion, blinded by hunger, charges across what looks like solid earth. Then the ground collapses beneath it, the roar turning into a scream as it falls onto sharpened wood. The shock buys time. The panic among the other predators sends them fleeing. Around the fire, trembling hands clutch children tightly, but for once, the story does not end with silence. It ends with survival, earned not by strength, but by foresight. These strategies required more than tools. They required planning, cooperation, and memory. One person could not dig a pit or build a barricade alone. Entire groups worked together, gathering wood, weaving ropes, stacking stones. Even in moments of exhaustion, they prepared, knowing that failure to do so meant certain death. The land itself became part of human culture. Every cliff, tree, and river studied not only for food and water, but for defense. The predators learned too. Some avoided certain places, sensing danger where others had fallen. But even this was a victory, for it meant that humans could carve out spaces where the balance tilted in their favor. With every successful trap, every ambush survived, confidence grew. Fear still lingered in every shadow, but it was no longer paralyzing. It became a teacher, guiding hands to build, to plan, to use the land itself as armor. This was the beginning of something far larger than survival. It was the first sign that humans could shape the natural world to suit their needs, bending rivers, stones, and earth into allies. They had begun to fight back, not only with weapons, but with ideas. And those ideas were stronger than any claw or fang, for they carried forward into every generation, whispering the truth that cleverness could beat brute force. And from this truth, humans would take the next step, learning not only to use the land, but to study the very creatures that hunted them, turning knowledge itself into a weapon as sharp as any spear. Traps and ambushes gave humans a fighting chance, but clever use of the land could only take them so far. To survive, they had to know the predators themselves. Every roar in the distance, every track in the mud, every broken branch told a story, and humans learned to read it. Over time, this became one of their greatest strengths. While predators relied on instinct, humans relied on observation, memory, and patience. Lions, for example, had patterns. They hunted most often at night, moving in coordinated silence across the grasslands. They crouched low, their golden eyes reflecting moonlight, waiting for the moment to strike. Early humans noticed that lions returned to the same hunting grounds again and again. Certain valleys echoed with roars more than others. Certain watering holes drew prides night after night. Families learned to avoid those places during dangerous hours. They did not need to see the lions to know where they were, for the land itself told the truth through scattered bones, paw prints, and the cries of other animals fleeing in terror. Hyenas taught even harsher lessons. They were not just scavengers, but hunters with dens hidden deep within caves or dug into hillsides. When humans found such places, they learned to mark them in memory, passing warnings from one generation to the next. Approaching a hyena den meant almost certain death, for the animals worked together in large numbers, their bone-crushing jaws leaving no escape. Some camps shifted entirely, abandoning regions where hyenas ruled. Others set careful watch, learning that hyenas prowled most when the moon was high, their laughter echoing in the dark like a cruel signal. Crocodiles along rivers had their own patterns. They floated motionless during the heat of the day, but at dawn and dusk they lurked near the edges, ready to snap at anything that moved. Humans learned to send their strongest adults to fetch water, never the young, and to use long sticks to test the shallows before stepping in. A ripple where none should be. A log that seemed to move too smoothly across the current, these became warnings recognized at a glance. It was not strength that saved them, but sharp eyes and sharper memory. This awareness shaped daily life. Before gathering food, people studied the trees for claw marks that might reveal a leopard's presence. Before sleeping, they listened to the cries of birds or the sudden silence of insects, knowing that predators moved in when the smaller creatures fell still. They watched the trails of antelope and gazelle, for where prey traveled, predators always followed. Knowledge passed not only through action, but through stories. Around the fire, parents taught children the signs of danger. A certain paw print meant lion. A certain sound in the grass meant hyena. A still pool at sunset could hide the jaws of a crocodile. Stories of attacks, told with trembling voices, became warnings that children carried for life. Even nightmares served a purpose, planting fear that kept them cautious when they wandered too far from the fire. With each new generation, these lessons grew sharper. People learned not to wander alone, not to walk carelessly through tall grass, not to drink without watching the water first. They learned to move when predators slept and hide when predators hunted. They began to time their hunts, waiting until lions had fed, then following in their wake to scavenge the remains. It was a dangerous strategy, but one that filled empty stomachs without facing the full fury of the hunt. Every step forward was hard-earned. It was not that predators grew weaker, but that humans grew wiser. They began to predict the moves of their enemies, to live not only in reaction but in anticipation. This intelligence transformed the balance in subtle ways. Where once humans stumbled blindly into danger, now they moved with purpose, guided by patterns that others ignored. And this habit of watching, remembering, and planning did more than keep them alive. It sowed the first seeds of culture, of knowledge passed down as a tool, as valuable as fire or stone. The predators had power in their teeth and claws, but humans had begun to wield the power of thought. And as they studied the killers around them, they also began to study themselves, shaping their fear into wisdom and their wisdom into survival. From here, the fireside stories grew into something more than warnings. They became myths, symbols, and the earliest form of shared memory that carried lessons long after the danger had passed. When the sun fell and shadows stretched across the savannah, survival did not end with the fading light. It continued around the glow of the fire, where voices replaced weapons and words carried the weight of protection. The first storytellers were not entertainers, they were guardians. Their tales were not shaped for amusement, but for survival. Around the crackle of flames, children listened wide-eyed as their parents spoke of dangers lurking in the dark, of predators waiting just beyond the reach of the firelight. These stories were not meant to calm, but to prepare. Imagine a child drifting toward sleep as sparks floated upward into the black sky. A parent leans close, and whispers of the hyena's laugh echoing across the grasslands, warning them never to wander at night. Another child is told of claw marks carved into trees by leopards, a sign that danger sleeps above as well as below. A story of a lion dragging a careless hunter into the dark might seem terrifying, but to the child who heard it, that fear was life-saving. It planted caution deep within their heart, ensuring they would remember the lesson when their own turn came to face the wilderness. These stories carried details sharper than any spear. They taught not only which sounds to fear, but when to move silently and when to stay still. They spoke of rivers where crocodiles waded, reminding listeners that water was both a gift and a trap. They told of caves that belonged not to humans, but to bears or hyenas, warning that not every shadow was safe to step into. The firelight made these warnings unforgettable. Faces glowed, eyes reflected the flames, and every crackle of burning wood seemed to echo the danger outside the circle of light. Fear became a thread woven into the fabric of culture. It was not blind panic, but a tool. Through fear, children grew cautious. They learned respect for the animals that stalked them, and they grew attentive to the whispers of the land. A rustle in the grass, a sudden silence among the birds, even the faintest shift of the wind became signals that were recognized because of the stories told night after night. With time, the stories grew into more than warnings. They became shared memory, a way for entire groups to hold knowledge together. One person's close call became a tale retold, spreading wisdom across generations. The scar on a hunter's arm became a legend that children remembered, shaping how they moved, when they hunted, and how they built their camps. What began as survival tips whispered in the dark became a form of culture, the earliest kind of education, passed not in books, but in words carved into memory. The power of these stories was more than practical. They bound people together. Around the fire, fear was not carried alone, it was shared. When children clutched their parents during tales of lions or bears, they learned not only about danger, but about the strength of community. When adults retold stories of near escapes, they reminded everyone that survival depended on each other as much as it did on spears or traps. Even myths that seemed strange to us today were rooted in real dangers. The monsters whispered about in the dark were often the reflection of predators that had once torn through camps. A spirit that haunted the rivers may have begun as a tale of crocodiles. A demon in the trees might have been a leopard. These were not fictions, but memories wrapped in symbols. Fear and wisdom blended together, giving humans a way to remember the past and prepare for the future. The birth of storytelling was, in many ways, the birth of culture itself. Words turned into weapons sharper than claws, shaping behavior, guiding choices, and ensuring that the mistakes of one generation did not need to be repeated by the next. Where predators relied only on instinct, humans created something new. They carried knowledge across lifetimes, protecting children who had never seen a lion or a hyena by planting the memory of those dangers into their imagination long before they faced them. And from these first stories, spoken by trembling voices in the flicker of firelight, humans discovered that memory itself could be shaped into survival. What began as warnings about predators soon grew into symbols of courage, as bones and claws from those same beasts were turned into ornaments and talismans, reminders that even fear could be transformed into power. Around the fire, the stories warned of predators, but in the morning light, something remarkable often happened. From the ashes of fear came symbols of power. When a predator was defeated, even rarely, its remains became more than just bones or teeth. They became proof that humans were not entirely helpless. They became trophies, symbols, and talismans that turned terror into something that could be worn on the body. Imagine a hunter returning to camp, not only alive but carrying the tooth of a lion that had once threatened the group. That tooth, strung on a cord of sinew and worn around the neck, was not decoration. It was a statement. It told the others, and perhaps even the hunter himself, that fear could be conquered. To wear a claw or fang was to carry the memory of a victory, rare and fragile though it was. It was a reminder that humans were not always prey. These symbols grew into the earliest forms of courage. A necklace of hyena teeth might be given to the bravest among the group, a mark of honor recognized by all. A bracelet made from claws could become a token passed to the next generation, carrying the weight of survival through bloodlines. Even children, who had huddled in terror by the fire, would look at these bones and feel a spark of hope. If their people could kill a lion, then perhaps they were not as powerless as the darkness made them feel. The practice was more than emotional, it was spiritual. Bones and teeth carried the essence of the predator itself. By wearing them, humans believed they absorbed some of its strength. The courage of the lion, the cunning of the wolf, the ferocity of the bear, these qualities were imagined to flow through the sharp remains of their bodies. In this way, fear was transformed into control. What had once been the source of nightmares became a charm against future danger. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of this ancient practice. Burials from the Stone Age show bodies adorned with teeth, claws, and animal bones carefully placed with them. These were not casual ornaments. They were chosen with intention, likely representing the most dangerous enemies faced in life. A man buried with lion teeth was remembered not only as a person, but as a survivor of battles with the king of predators. A child buried with claws might have been seen as protected, even in death, by the strength of the beast they never lived to defeat. The power of these objects went beyond individuals. They shaped identity for entire groups. Tribes began to mark themselves with the remains of the predators around them. One community might wear the teeth of wolves, another might favor the claws of big cats, another still might carve bones into tools that served both function and symbolism. The animals that once terrorized them became part of who they were, woven into their culture and self-understanding. Holding a predator's tooth was different from holding a simple stone. A stone had no story, but a tooth had blood behind it. It had the memory of fear, the struggle for life, and the triumph of survival. Every time someone touched it, they felt the echo of that struggle. It gave courage to the fearful, confidence to the hunter, and a shared sense of pride to the entire camp. These early tokens were also teaching tools. Children who wore a claw around their neck did not only carry a symbol, they carried a story. Each tooth or bone was explained, connected to a warning or a lesson. This claw belonged to the beast that attacked our camp. We drove it away, and now we wear its strength. Such words gave young minds a tangible reminder of survival, anchoring lessons in objects they could see and touch. In the glow of the fire, the line between fear and power blurred. Humans began to understand that they could take control of their fears by embodying them. To wear the fang of a predator was to say, I am no longer only prey. It was an early act of defiance, a declaration that humans could shape not only the world around them, but the meaning of the dangers within it. And as humans began to weave predator bones into their very sense of identity, they discovered new allies that would take the battle for survival even further. Allies not carved from bone, but living at their side, watching the night as guardians. The Stone Age was a world where every scrape and bite carried the weight of life or death. Unlike us, who can walk into a hospital for stitches or antibiotics, our ancestors had nothing but the earth itself to turn to. A simple cut could fester, a swollen insect bite could spread through the blood, a burn from the fire could mean days of agony, and yet, against all odds, they found ways to fight back, not with claws or fangs, but with plants. Imagine an early human, crouched on the edge of a forest, watching an injured animal. Maybe a deer with a gash rubbed its wound against a patch of leaves. Maybe a bird pecked at certain berries after being stung. Humans were observers, and from watching the natural world, they began to experiment. Some leaves, when pressed against the skin, soothed the pain. Some roots, when chewed, numbed the mouth. And some berries brought only death, teaching hard lessons paid in blood. Trial and error became their medicine. Herbs were not just plants to eat, they were pieces of knowledge. A sprig of mint could ease stomach pains. The bark of a tree, when scraped and boiled, dulled fevers. Charcoal from the fire could be placed on wounds to draw out infection. None of it was perfect, but in a world without safety, even a small comfort could mean survival. The sacredness of these discoveries cannot be overstated. A mother who lost one child to fever might save another by boiling water with bitter herbs. A hunter gashed by the tusk of a boar might live if the wound was packed with resin from pine trees, sticky and antiseptic. These plants became more than food, they became symbols of life itself. To early humans, they were gifts from the earth, offerings from nature that could mean the difference between holding your child or burying them. And slowly, traditions began to form, the memory of which root soothed a burn, or which leaf stung the tongue with poison, was passed down in whispers around the fire. Each generation carried more wisdom than the last. Stories were told of sacred groves where the healing plants grew, of riversides where certain moss could be gathered, of the bitter taste that meant safety or the sweet taste that meant danger. This was medicine, not written in books, but carved into memory and shared through lived experience. It is easy to forget how fragile life was then. A predator's claws could tear the flesh, but infection was the slower, crueler killer. A swelling that spread through the body left people helpless. Children were especially vulnerable. A scratch from a thorn might become a festering wound by nightfall, but knowledge gave our species a weapon no animal possessed. We learned to experiment, to endure, and to remember. The fear of poison also shaped survival. Plants that killed were just as important as those that healed. Bright berries glistening in the sun might tempt a hungry tribe, but one mistake could wipe out an entire family. So they learned to test in tiny amounts, to observe carefully before committing, to sacrifice one brave soul who dared to taste. Death taught them, and they carried those lessons forward so others would not repeat the same mistakes. Over time, this knowledge began to shape culture itself. Certain plants were not just useful, they became sacred. A herb that eased childbirth became the symbol of fertility. A root that calmed pain was placed on altars. The healers of the tribe, often the wisest women and men, became keepers of this hidden world, protectors of secrets that gave humans an edge against the dangers that surrounded them. Their role was as vital as the hunters, For what good was killing prey if you could not heal the wounds it caused? This was the beginning of medicine, born not from science in laboratories, but from desperate observation, bitter sacrifice, and the will to endure. It was intelligence used not to build weapons, but to mend broken bodies. And this intelligence, this curiosity, was the same force that allowed humans to not only survive, but to imagine a world beyond mere survival. The bond between people and plants was one of the earliest signs that we were something different, something more than prey. It proved that we were not only shaped by our environment, but that we could shape our destiny through knowledge. That fragile thread of understanding grew stronger with every generation, binding us to the earth, even as we learned to rise above it. And as the tribes grew wiser, as they carried fire through the dark and stories through the ages, their connection to the land deepened. Healing was no longer just instinct, it was tradition, a tradition that would stand side by side with spears, fire, and teamwork in the struggle against the giants that ruled the world. The nights of terror never fully ended, but slowly something shifted. With fire at their center, with stone weapons in hand, and with dogs at their side, humans began to look at predators differently. The fear was still there, pulsing through every heartbeat, yet alongside it came a new thought, a dangerous thought. What if the hunters could be hunted? At first, it must have seemed unthinkable. A single human standing before a lion was a death sentence. But a group of 20 humans, carrying sharpened spears, armed with fire and courage, could tilt the balance. The savannah, that had once been filled only with danger, began to see a reversal. For the first time, humans plotted not only how to hide from predators, but how to fight back. Imagine a band of hunters approaching a cave where hyenas had dragged their kills. In earlier days, this would have been a place of terror, a spot to avoid at all costs. But now, with dogs barking and spears raised, humans moved forward together. They shouted, banged rocks, and pushed fire into the dark. The hyenas snarled, but they backed away. For once, it was the predators who fled into the night, leaving behind bones and scraps that humans carried away in triumph. Revenge was not only about food, it was about reclaiming power. The lions that had circled camps at night found themselves stalked in return. Groups of men and women fanned out across the grasslands, tracking paw prints with patience, using numbers and strategy to corner even the king of beasts. It was not an easy fight. Many died. A lion was not brought down by one spear, but by many, by persistence, by courage, by the refusal to keep running. And when the beast finally collapsed, when its mane was soaked with blood, the humans who survived stood over it with something more than relief. They had tasted what it felt like to be the hunters. Wolves, too, once shadows at the edge of every fire, became targets. Not the ones that had grown tame, but the packs that still prowled, waiting for weakness. Tribes set ambushes near watering holes, waiting for wolves to drink, driving them into traps where sharpened stakes ended their pursuit. Each victory gave humans meat, fur, and bones, but it also gave something greater. It gave the sense that the world was no longer entirely against them. The revenge of prey was not always violent. Sometimes it was about pushing predators away from land, forcing them to move, step by step, until humans claimed new territory. Where once people trembled at the edges of caves, they now lit fires inside and claimed them as their own. Where once lions ruled the tall grasses, humans carved paths with dogs and spears, marking the land as theirs. Every act of defiance was written not only in blood, but in survival. Still, these victories were not easy. Each hunt carried risk. A single mistake could leave a body torn apart, a family mourning by the fire, but humans accepted the risk because the rewards were greater. A lion brought down was food for days. A hyena den raided was safety for the children. Every predator defeated was one less shadow circling the camp at night. And every claw, every fang, every bone kept as a symbol whispered the same message: the hunted were rising. The change was not only physical, it was psychological. To fight back was to believe survival was possible. The fear that had once ruled every step did not vanish, but it was tempered by hope. Each victory fed not just stomachs but courage. Courage passed from one generation to the next, carried in stories, in trophies, and in scars. It is easy now to look at lions or hyenas and see them as magnificent animals, rulers of their own kingdoms. But for early humans, they were reminders of a time when every breath was borrowed. To strike back at them was more than hunting. It was revenge, a reversal of the roles carved into nature since the beginning. It was proof that humanity was changing, that weakness could transform into strength, that prey could rise against predator. And with every claw claimed, with every den emptied, with every lion driven back into the grass, humans were not only fighting predators, they were learning to master the balance of fear and respect. They had begun to see themselves not as victims of nature, but as challengers to it. And this shift carried them into a new kind of relationship with the animals around them, one that was as much about awe and worship as it was about survival. When humans first began to fight back against predators, survival was no longer a one-sided game. But even as they struck with sharpened spears and fire, fear did not disappear. If anything, it deepened, weaving itself into the stories people told and the symbols they carved into stone. To survive a predator was rare enough, but to defeat one was unforgettable. And because these creatures shaped the lives of our ancestors so completely, they also shaped their beliefs. Inside caves where people once huddled for warmth, the walls came alive with art, with nothing more than charcoal, red ochre, and fingers dipped in clay. Early humans painted the world that terrified them. Lions with manes like crowns, bears looming larger than any human figure, wolves prowling with glowing eyes. These animals were not drawn small or weak. They were given size, movement, and power. Some paintings show lions at the center of a scene, surrounded by humans who appear small and fragile, as if the artists wanted to remind every viewer of the scale of danger. Others show bears standing upright, towering over hunters who can only raise their spears in trembling hands. The cave art was more than decoration. It was memory, warning, and reverence. These predators were not simply animals, they were forces of nature, embodiments of fear and awe. To the minds of Stone Age people, a lion was more than a beast in the grass. It was a god of death, a devil of the night, something that ruled not only the land, but also the imagination. Children grew up staring at those paintings, listening to stories whispered by the fire about the beasts that prowled just outside. They learned that the lion was not only fierce but also clever, that the bear was not only strong but unpredictable. Myths grew from encounters. A hyena dragging a man from his sleep became the tale of a demon that stole souls in the dark. A bird of prey that carried off a child became a spirit with wings sharp as knives. For people who lived each day surrounded by death, there was no line between predator and deity. Surviving these creatures often felt like surviving judgment itself. When a hunter came home scarred by a lion's claw, his survival was more than luck. It was as if he had been tested and found worthy. The claw might be kept as a necklace, the tooth buried in the earth, the skin draped over shoulders, not just for warmth, but as a symbol of power. To wear the remains of a predator was to wear its spirit, to carry the strength of what had once nearly killed you. But with respect came fear that never fully faded. Rituals began to form. Some tribes painted their bodies before hunts, believing the colors would protect them from the gaze of predators. Others left offerings at cave entrances or riverbanks, pleading for safety before venturing into danger. The predators were no longer just challenges to be fought. They were spirits that had to be appeased, rulers of the night who might punish arrogance. It is easy now to think of gods as distant beings, living in the sky or in sacred books. But for the first humans, gods had teeth and claws. They roared in the darkness, shook the earth with their steps, and left trails of blood across the grass. Fear was not separate from worship. They were two sides of the same fire, flickering in the dark. This mixture of fear and reverence explains why predators filled not only stories, but also the deepest layers of human memory. Even today, lions, bears, and wolves remain symbols of power in our cultures. They still appear on flags, in myths, and in our dreams, long after the last cave paintings faded. The truth is simple. We feared what we survived, and because of that, we remembered. And those memories carried forward. The more humans pushed predators back, the more they reshaped the world. But the respect never vanished, and the shadows of those ancient beasts lingered even as new tools and strategies gave humans control over their destiny. For countless generations, humans had lived in the shadows of giants. Every night had been a reminder that they were weaker, smaller, and slower than the predators around them. But slowly, piece by piece, the balance of power began to change. With fire to guard the darkness, with sharpened stone to pierce thick hides, and with dogs to warn of danger, humans no longer trembled in silence. The hunted had become hunters, and with that shift came something the natural world had never seen before. The predators that once ruled the earth began to vanish. It was not sudden, but it was steady. The great cave bears that once towered over men dwindled as humans pushed deeper into caves and claimed them for their families. Bears could fight, but they could not match a group of humans armed with fire and spears. Dire wolves that once roamed in vast packs across the plains found their numbers thinning as humans spread out and took the prey they depended on. Lions, larger than those we know today, were cornered, stalked, and killed. What had once been a world where humans were only a small piece of the food chain began to tilt until predators no longer had the same control. The decline of the giants was not only about direct battles. Human expansion itself was a force as powerful as any weapon. As tribes grew in number, they took more land, more water, more prey. Herds of deer, bison, and mammoth that predators relied on were hunted by people instead. The great beasts were not only challenged by human spears, but also starved as their food vanished. The more humans spread, the fewer safe places remained for the animals that had once terrified them. There are sites where the evidence is still written in bones. Caves where lions once carved their dens now contain hearths and ash, proof that humans had taken over. Pits filled with the remains of wolves and hyenas tell stories of entire packs hunted to extinction. And painted on the walls above these remains are images of the very creatures humans were destroying, as if the art itself was part of the farewell. To worship a predator did not mean sparing it. In fact, it often meant the opposite. The more powerful an animal was, the more important it became to prove it could be killed. For the first time in history, humans were not only surviving predators, they were erasing them. The giants that had ruled for thousands of years could not adapt quickly enough to this new kind of rival. A saber-toothed cat could take down a bison with fangs sharp as knives, but it could not stand against 100 humans with spears. A cave bear could crush a single man with one swipe of its paw, but it could not fight fire that burned its home from within. Predators had always been strong, but they had never faced intelligence that worked together in groups, planning, learning, and returning again and again until victory was won. To stand over the body of a lion or a bear was to feel something ancient stir inside. It was not only triumph, but also a shift in identity. No longer did humans see themselves as prey. They saw themselves as rulers of the land, a species apart. Every victory confirmed it, every extinction sealed it. Yet there was an unspoken cost. The silence that followed when the giants were gone was different from the silence of fear. It was emptier, thinner, a world where the shadows were not as deep. Still, the story of survival left no room for mercy. To the people of the Stone Age, the death of a predator meant the life of a child, the safety of a family, the chance for tomorrow. And so, one by one, the giants disappeared. What had once been their world was becoming ours. For the first time, humans were in control, shaping the land not only for themselves, but for every creature that lived within it. And that new control would change everything that came after. When the giants fell, humanity stood taller, but the earth itself was never the same again. The savannas, the forests, and the rivers had once echoed with the voices of predators that shaped every heartbeat of early human life. Lions larger than any alive today, wolves that hunted in enormous packs, bears that ruled caves like kings. Their power had once kept the balance of nature in place, holding herds in check, spreading fear through the grasslands, forcing every creature to move with caution. When humans rose to dominance, that balance began to fracture. Every victory carried a cost. Each time a lion's den was emptied, each time a wolf pack was scattered, the world grew quieter. At first, this silence may have seemed like safety. Without the giants, there were fewer roars in the night, fewer shadows stalking the edges of camps. But nature does not remain empty for long. When the predators declined, the prey multiplied. Herds of animals grew larger, feeding longer on grasses and stripping the land bare. The delicate rhythm between hunter and hunted faltered, and the landscape began to change beneath the feet of those who had caused it. The savannah that once trembled with predator eyes became a place where herds moved almost unchecked. Fields that had been groomed by the hunting habits of lions and wolves became overgrazed. Rivers churned with more thirsty animals than before, muddying waters and driving fish away. The fall of predators was not just the loss of danger, it was the loss of balance, and it was a balance that could never fully return. For the humans who lived through it, this change may not have been visible all at once. They likely celebrated the safety of their children, the freedom to walk without hearing the growl of something stronger in the tall grass. Yet without knowing it, they were shaping a new kind of world, one where they themselves would have to play the role of predator. They became not just hunters for survival, but managers of the land itself. Without lions to keep the herds in check, humans had to hunt more often. Without wolves to scatter grazing animals, humans had to follow them further, building strategies to do the work nature once did on its own. And as they killed, they also remembered. The bones of lions and bears, once worn as symbols of fear and power, became rarer, then vanished. The stories whispered around fires turned from warnings about predators to tales of victories long past. The gods of tooth and claw faded into memory, and in their place, humans crowned themselves as rulers of the earth. But beneath that triumph was an unseen cost. The diversity of predators, the very creatures that had taught humans fear, strategy, and unity, was shrinking. The savannah would never again be the same living stage it had once been. Where once the night was filled with the roars of predators claiming their territory, there was now only the crackle of human fire. Where once the rivers had been dangerous places patrolled by crocodiles larger than any we know today, humans learned to approach with less fear. The world had been tamed, but with that taming came a certain loss of wildness, a thinning of the forces that had defined life for so long. The triumph of humans was real, but so was the shadow it cast. For every predator that disappeared, an entire chain of life shifted. The earth itself bent under the weight of this new dominance. The predators had once been the guardians of balance, and when they were gone, humanity stepped into their place, often without understanding that the role carried responsibility as much as power. The story of survival was not written in victories alone. It was also written in what was lost along the way, in the silenced voices of the giants that once ruled the night. And in that silence, humans carried forward, building new tools, new strategies, and new stories, all while walking across a world forever changed by their rise. What kept us alive was never brute strength. We were not the fastest or the fiercest, and we had no natural weapons to defend ourselves. What carried us through those impossible nights and terrifying hunts were things invisible but powerful: teamwork, intelligence, fire, and fear. These were not gifts that guaranteed survival, but tools that had to be sharpened every single day, tested against teeth, claws, and the cold silence of death. Teamwork was the first shield. Alone, a human was fragile, but together, we became something larger than ourselves. Around the fire, families grew into bands, and bands into tribes. Every set of eyes watching the darkness gave the group a better chance of spotting danger before it struck. Every strong arm that carried a spear could protect not just the one who held it, but the children huddled behind the circle of adults. Teamwork meant no one had to face a lion in the grass or a wolf at the edge of camp without others at their side. It was the difference between being hunted and fighting back as a living wall. Intelligence was the second weapon, sharper than any claw. Humans learned to read the land like a story, noticing the smallest of signs: a broken branch that told of a predator's passage, a trail of blood that revealed a wounded animal, a change in the movement of birds that signaled danger nearby. While predators relied on muscle, humans relied on memory and observation. We passed down patterns of survival, teaching children which plants could heal and which rivers to avoid, which animals stalked in the day and which in the night. Intelligence was not only knowing but remembering, and it allowed us to carry lessons forward so mistakes did not have to be repeated. Fire stood as the third and most visible force. Its light cut into the darkness that once belonged to predators. Its smoke carried safety into the air, warning animals to stay away. Its heat gave strength to bodies that would otherwise have frozen in the night. Fire turned raw meat into food that fed minds and muscles more efficiently, fueling both thought and strength. It was more than a weapon. It was a companion, a presence that walked with us into caves and across plains. To huddle around a fire was to feel, for a moment, like the hunted had become untouchable, protected by a barrier that predators dared not cross. But fear itself was perhaps the greatest survival tool of all. It was fear that kept us awake when the night grew too quiet, fear that forced us to listen for the faintest rustle of grass, fear that made us run before teeth could strike. Fear became woven into our very nerves, teaching us to jump at shadows and tremble at roars, yet that trembling often saved lives. A fearless human was a dead human. Fear was the whisper of ancestors in our blood, warning us of dangers long before we could see them. Even today, the way our skin prickles in the dark, or the way our hearts race at the sight of sharp teeth, is not weakness, but memory. Survival was never promised, and it was never easy. Every night could have been our last. Every hunt could have ended in silence. Survival was earned with cooperation, with patience, with firelight, and with the constant tension of fear running through our veins. Those victories did not just keep us alive in the moment, they carved themselves into our DNA. The instincts that guided our ancestors still echo in us now, hidden in the way we gather together in groups, in the way we seek safety and light, in the way we tell stories of danger and warning. These four forces, teamwork, intelligence, fire, and fear, became the foundation on which humanity was built. They turned the weakest creature on the savannah into the most enduring, the one that would outlast not only the predators that stalked us, but the shifting ages of the earth itself. And as the predators disappeared and the balance of the wild tilted in our favor, those same forces continued to guide us forward, carrying us into challenges even greater than the ones faced under the stars of the Stone Age. For much of our early history, survival was not guaranteed. Entire lineages of humans disappeared forever, their stories ending in silence. Neanderthals, who were powerful and well adapted to the cold, vanished from the world after surviving for hundreds of thousands of years. The Denisovans, who once roamed the mountains and plains of Asia, also faded into extinction, leaving only fragments of their DNA behind in us. Even other groups of early humans, whose names we only know from scattered bones and teeth, lived and died without leaving a trace of their voices or their stories. Homo sapiens, our ancestors, stood on the edge of this same fate. There were moments when we were so few that the entire species could have been lost in a single catastrophe. Genetic evidence suggests that at certain points in prehistory, our population may have been reduced to only a few thousand individuals. Imagine the fragility of that moment. A tribe caught by disease, a drought lasting just a little too long, a volcanic eruption spreading ash across the land, and everything could have ended before it ever truly began. We were not destined to survive. We were lucky to endure. One unlucky night was sometimes all it would have taken. A predator slipping past the fire at the edge of camp, a flood sweeping through a valley, or an illness that spread silently from person to person could have ended entire families. When we look at fossil sites, we sometimes find the bones of groups who never made it through the night, their camp wiped out by lions, hyenas, or bears. In those bones, you can almost feel the echo of a scream cut short, the panic of running feet, and the terror of a darkness that gave no mercy. And yet, here we are, because somewhere another group survived. Where one family was lost, another held on. Where one band was driven into the sea, another found higher ground. It was always that close. Survival was not a steady march forward. It was a fragile dance at the edge of extinction, with one wrong step threatening to send us tumbling into oblivion. When we think of humans today, numbering in the billions, it is hard to picture how close our story came to ending. But deep in our history, there were times when all of humanity could have fit into a single small town. Every child born in those days was not only a new life but a flicker of hope that the line would continue. Every death was a reminder of how thin that line really was. To the people living then, there was no certainty that tomorrow would come. Life was lived in the shadow of loss, where extinction was not an idea, but a constant threat, hovering over every fire and every cave. This fragility shaped us. It is the reason fear is stitched into our nerves, the reason cooperation became second nature, the reason we clung so fiercely to one another. When you know your survival depends not only on your own strength, but on the survival of the entire group, every hand that lifts a spear, every arm that carries a child, every voice that warns of danger becomes part of the fight for existence. The bones of other humans tell us what might have been, The Neanderthals, whose hands shaped tools and whose eyes watched the same stars we see today, are gone. The Denisovans, whose DNA whispers faintly in some of us, are gone. There were others, unknown names, who vanished without leaving even that trace. We walk in the shadow of their absence, and yet we are here because of chance, because of resilience, because of small victories that piled up against overwhelming odds. Every moment of survival was a close call. Every generation carried us just far enough forward to face the next trial. And though we stand here now, it is humbling to realize that our story almost ended many times before it truly began. The line of humanity was not unbreakable. It was fragile, delicate, and almost lost to the same fate that claimed so many of our cousins. What if our story had ended before it truly began? Imagine for a moment that one of those close calls had gone the other way. If a drought had lasted a little longer, if a single eruption had thrown more ash into the sky, or if predators had broken through the thin circle of fire one too many times, in that world there would be no cities, no books, no songs, and no voices telling stories in the night. The earth would still turn beneath the same stars, but it would be ruled by others. Picture the savannah without us. Lions, already larger and fiercer than those that prowl today, might have risen to the top as the undisputed rulers. With no humans to challenge them, their prides could have spread far and wide, roaming in numbers that shaped the very balance of the land. Hyenas, clever and relentless, may have filled the gaps, their laughter echoing across empty plains where no human footsteps remained. In the forests and mountains, wolves might have taken control, their packs spreading into territories we later claimed as our own. They would not only have survived, they would have thrived in the silence left behind by our disappearance. It is chilling to imagine how the world would look without us. The bones of Homo sapiens would lie buried under layers of soil, discovered one day by creatures with no reason to wonder who we were. Our fire would have gone out, and the night would once again belong to predators. The earth would not mourn our absence. Rivers would still flow, trees would still grow, and animals would still hunt and breed. The world would move forward, as it always does, with or without us. We like to believe we are the center of the story, but nature does not play favorites. If we had not endured, perhaps Neanderthals might have lasted longer, carrying their strong bodies and sharp tools through the ages. Perhaps Denisovans might have thrived in the mountains, shaping a world entirely different from ours, or perhaps no human species at all would remain, leaving the savannas to great cats, bears, and wolves. The thought alone is unsettling, because it reminds us how fragile our place in history truly was. Think of the predators themselves. Without humans to push them back, saber-toothed cats may have ruled for far longer, their massive fangs striking fear into every creature they hunted. Cave bears could have remained kings of the mountains, unchallenged by clever hands or sharpened spears. Dire wolves, with their bone-crushing jaws, might have spread across continents, their howls filling nights with a sound that marked them as the apex of survival. In such a world, it would be these beasts that carved the story of life, not us. Our grip on existence was never strong. For most of history, it was as if we hung by a thread, swaying between survival and extinction. We survived not because we were stronger, but because in moments of desperation we found ways to endure. Strip those victories away, and the fragile chain that connects our ancestors to us breaks in an instant. Without fire, without weapons, without cooperation, the predators would have won. And if they had, the memory of humans would be nothing more than scattered bones gnawed by teeth and buried under time. It is humbling to realize that the world we live in is not inevitable, but the result of countless narrow escapes. Each one of those escapes gave us another chance to step forward, while other species slipped into silence. Without them, the future would have belonged to the predators we feared most. Imagine lions spreading into Europe, dire wolves filling North America, or giant crocodiles continuing to rule the rivers unchecked. The earth would still be wild, but its rulers would wear fur, scales, and fangs instead of shaping tools with human hands. That alternate history lingers like a shadow over our real one. It shows us how close we came to being erased, how easily the predators of the Stone Age could have ended our story, and how the balance of power on Earth could have tilted in a very different direction. And yet, somehow, our fragile line held. Every time you look at a lion, remember that once they almost erased us. Those golden eyes that we admire in zoos and documentaries were once the last thing our ancestors saw before teeth closed around them. Those claws that now swipe lazily at the air once tore through skin and bone, leaving behind nothing but silence. When we look at lions today, we see majesty and beauty, but our ancestors saw the face of terror, and they carried that memory in their bones. It is easy to forget how fragile our story really is. We live in a world where the night is tamed by light bulbs and campfires are replaced by stoves, where the roar of a predator is something you hear in the distance of a wildlife film rather than just outside the circle of your fire. But not so long ago, the balance was different. One wrong step into tall grass could mean death. One trip to fetch water could end in jaws snapping shut, and one careless night without fire could leave an entire family gone by morning. Our very existence is a miracle of narrow escapes. For every tribe that endured, another may have been wiped away. For every child who grew strong enough to walk, another may have been carried off by predators before they even had a name. We like to believe survival was destiny, that humans were always meant to rise, but the truth is that it was never promised. It was clawed from the teeth of the world, earned in sweat, blood, and desperate courage. Think of what survival required. A father standing between his family and the snapping jaws of a lion, a mother clutching her children in the dark, praying the fire would not go out, a child learning to stay quiet as the shadows of hyenas circled just outside the light. These moments were not rare. They happened again and again across countless nights until they became the fabric of who we are. Fear, resilience, and determination wove together to create the species that tells this story now. When we walk into a museum and see the bones of saber-toothed cats, or stand before the fossil of a cave bear, we are not just looking at the remains of great predators. We are looking at the ghosts of those who nearly claimed our place. Each skull, with its massive fangs, each claw sharpened by nature, tells a story of a battle we should not have survived. Yet here we are, still breathing, still building, still telling stories under the same stars our ancestors once stared at with trembling hearts. It is humbling to realize that survival was not the triumph of strength, but the triumph of persistence. We were weak, slower than the hunters around us, softer than the predators that stalked us. But we endured, not by force, but by fire, not by muscle, but by memory, not by luck alone, but by learning, adapting, and holding on even when extinction pressed close. So tonight, as you listen to this story, remember that you are alive because those before you did not give up. They stood their ground when the night was filled with eyes. They kept the fire burning when the wind tried to snuff it out. They carried children in their arms across dangerous lands, even when predators followed close behind. Every breath you take is linked to those who refuse to let the story end. And now, here we are, looking back on the razor's edge our species once walked. The fact that we can sit in comfort, wrapped in blankets or lying beneath quiet skies, and speak of those days is proof of how far we have come. But it should also remind us that survival is never something to take for granted. The same earth that gave us life also tested us in the harshest ways imaginable, and for reasons that may forever remain a mystery, we passed those tests. This has been the story of how close we came to never existing at all. If you found yourself drawn into the struggle, if you felt the firelight flickering against the darkness, or if you could almost hear the roars in the night, then I invite you to stay with us. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Were you surprised by how fragile our survival really was? Did you imagine lions or wolves ruling the earth instead of us? I would love to know what you think. And if stories like this help you drift off to sleep or spark your curiosity about the forgotten past, then a like and a subscribe would mean the world to me. It tells the algorithm that there are people who still want to learn about science, survival, and mystery in a calm and gentle way. It helps this little corner of the internet grow, and it keeps these ancient stories alive. So as you close your eyes tonight, remember this: we were not born kings of the earth. We were not given survival as a gift. We earned it, one night at a time, through fear and fire, through courage and loss. And every lion, every hyena, every shadow in the dark was a reminder that survival was never certain. Yet here you are, proof that the hunted became the storytellers.